So, on to our first topic, the importance of good relationships for our mental health and for our emotional well-being. Now, there is a lot of research, I'm sure you've come across it, on the beneficial effects of good relationships. In schools, it's a key area for Estyn, for Ofsted, for healthy schools, and in Wales for our whole school framework. One piece of research by She and Fisher, a psychologist, highlights 5 pretty good benefits, really. So in a nutshell, and of course nothing's really as simple as this, but in a nutshell, to share with children, we can tell them that good relationships end up with less stress, and Dr. Fisher says knowing someone loves and supports you when you're going through your day, even if that person is not physically present, is a mental health booster. Absolutely agree with that, and part of the relationships theme is actually focuses on how relationships are still important even when we are not able to physically see the person. So the second bonus, a greater sense of purpose, so a good sense of kind of well-being and purpose to life. Actually, it's been proved, good relationships have been proved to add years to your life, which is pretty impressive, really. And again, in the kind of physical area, you're 3 times more likely to survive the first 3 months after heart surgery if you have good relationships in your life. So we know that good relationships contribute hugely to our emotional health and well-being. And in fact, it's more than wealth, possessions, good looks, and all of those things that young people and adults will often say would make them very happy. So this is a quiz from the secondary materials, and it makes this really important point in a lovely engaging way for young people. So do pause the presentation and have a look if you'd like to. The answers, well, pause it before I give you the answers. I'll give them to you now. Spoiler alert. 1A, 2D, 3D, 4B, 19% longer apparently, 5B and 6A. Also, it turns out from all the research that we feel happier when we help other people, more so in fact than when we ourselves are helped. So just a little reminder that when we were looking at getting on and falling out, we looked at the filling people's buckets, and this just reminds us really that helping other people makes us happier. So can kind of link it into previous themes here. Topic links to a number of progression steps. As always, I won't dwell on these. They're mainly within What Matters Statement 5, which focuses on how healthy relationships are fundamental to our well-being. So do pause and have a look if you're interested in the specifics. And again, same here in the SEAL materials, there's a similar progression in learning outcomes. And for SEAL, these can be found in the overview to each theme in the primary booklets. And of course, they continue through the secondary spiral curriculum model from year 7 to year 9. And these can be found in the learning opportunities booklet associated with each year group. They're organised slightly differently, as you'll probably know, in secondary SEAL. Lots of ways that the theme develops learners' abilities to think about who are the important people in their lives and how can we begin to recognise different types of relationships. So some of the activities are listed here on this slide, and we'll have a quick look at some of those in a little bit more detail. In year 2, for example, children further explore the importance of family, and this lovely, lovely book by Trish Cook can be found read aloud on YouTube. It's a really good way to develop the activity and to get children to talk about their families, following the circle time that's suggested in the SEAL materials. Of course, just a little caveat on this one, it is really, really important that we consider the possible reactions and prepare for those children who aren't able to live with the birth families for whatever reason. So we have to be really, really careful that we are recognising and celebrating families in all of their different forms. So just being a little bit sensitive here. Moulton Primary School here explored in different year groups what family means to each of us, and this work will have been really important in making sure that no child felt left out by work on families. This is about the theme assembly and this lovely year 2 activity, and these really develop that issue I mentioned earlier about, you know, people who are important to us but who can't live with us or who we don't physically see. So the assembly focuses on Max, whose dad lives in a different town, and who he doesn't see as often as he'd like to. The stories, they're great for exploring how relationships can still be important to us, even when the person isn't there, whatever the reason. And I just particularly love the title of the year 2 story, Granny Had to Go. You may be relieved to know she does only actually get as far as Pakistan. In year 4, children are encouraged to list the people that are important to them and think about how they feel about them. And as the focus in this collection of videos is on family links, you know, how we link this work with parents and carers outside of the school, it's quite interesting to note that this activity is developed further in the take-home materials, the gold set that I mentioned. If you have the gold set to hand or download it, it's year activity 4 and activity 7, where children and their parents or the family all together talk about the people who are important to them, and adults can talk about the people that were important to them when they were children, and so on. Family, friends, neighbours, friends, and so on. And some teachers have developed this into a circle of friends activity. So this involves the child completing a series of concentric circles with themselves in the middle and the names of the people at different levels of closeness to them. So on this one, you've got strangers on the outer level, professionals, acquaintances, extended family, and me there. So also extended family and friends. So this is actually a hugely useful activity, and lots of teachers use it in lots of different ways. So some teachers use it to develop empathy for those who might have gaps in their own circles. For example, you know, they might use stories or newspaper articles about refugees who figure later in our presentation, because of course they've lost a lot of those people that would normally populate the inner circles, leaving their friends behind very often when they've had to leave their own country. So really helpful for kind of promoting empathy. And some teachers also use it to teach the kind of appropriacy of behaviour at different levels of closeness. So, you know, who would it be okay to hug or kiss? Who would you feel comfortable on your own with in this list? And who could pick you up from school? Those kinds of things. So it's around keeping, can develop into kind of keeping safe type activities. And then the differentiation of relationships, which this is beginning to address, continues through the secondary materials. So learners are asked here, for example, this is a year 8 activity, who they would feel it was appropriate to disclose these different types of information about their life to. So it's quite a nice little activity, just, you know, encouraging children to differentiate their relationships with people at different levels of the concentric circles. I find this really helpful. The neuroscience, at a simple level, of course, behind our human need for connection. It's quite fascinating and it's quite accessible. So I found this short clip, and the neuroscience is explained by Dr. Hazel, who you can see there, and then Dan, who's a 16-year-old, or describes himself as a 16-year-old magician with Asperger's, looks at some of the ways that he connects with others, and we can connect generally with other people. So if you're able to watch the clip, and you might also like to share it with students to stimulate a discussion. Just on a practical note, the neuroscience bit is only up until about 1 minute 20 seconds, and then for the next sort of 40 seconds or so, it's a lovely little bit of Dan the magician sharing the role of magic in how he's managed to connect with other people despite having Asperger's, which can make it quite difficult to connect with other people for some. He also talks later on, after about 2 minutes 10 seconds, about practice, embracing failure, having a growth mindset, and it's really interesting from that perspective, perhaps to go along with going for goals. But it's the first 2 minutes that's particularly relevant for this theme. So when you've had a look at that, some of the things you might like to do is start a class discussion about why it's important to have connection and communicate with people, discuss the different ways that we can connect with people, link it to the different relationships we have, perhaps using the concentric circle activity. And then a nice little activity is just to ask pupils for 4 different topics of conversation, get pupils to talk with someone in the class in pairs that they wouldn't usually interact with, and ask them to talk just about the 4 different topics that have been raised previously. These activities from the SEAL materials, they're quite fun and interactive, involve moving around a little bit, which is always quite fun, and they're quite a useful introduction to the idea that sometimes we actually begin to feel more connected when we think of ourselves as the in-group and those outside as the out-group. So take a moment to just read through the activities, pause the presentation for the moment. You could try these activities with a class or group and link this to how it might feel to be excluded or be in the out group, and link that to stories or real life situations, being very sensitive obviously about any children who do tend to be quite isolated. The work can be very usefully developed, I think, to include how we might help an outsider to feel more part of the group. And that can be at a very basic level. So in Getting On and Falling Out, we looked at how we might welcome new children or visitors to the classroom. And older children, of course, can be asked if they recognise any time that they've actually done this. It's a really good introduction to the theme of loneliness, which is one of the focuses on the About Healthy Relationships section. So we've seen how important connection is to our mental health and emotional well-being. So it won't surprise anybody to know that loneliness has the opposite effects, often increasing stress, anxiety, depression, feelings of sadness and rejection. So it is really important that children learn to recognise loneliness, both in themselves and in other people, and to make efforts to make sure that nobody within the school feels lonely. And of course, this needs to be a whole school approach. And lots of the whole school ideas from Getting On and Falling Out and New Beginnings are really useful here. So, your buddy benchers in the playground, your welcome packs, your mentors for new students, and so on. This is a lovely book list with lots of useful books about loneliness for all different ages. And that can be accessed on the web. There's a link there, and very useful in developing those SEAL materials in the SEAL activities in the materials. Now, one school was in the news for taking their work in this area one step further. So they found out about loneliness in older people, and reading some of the facts reported by Age UK, I've put a couple on the slide there. For example, this is heartbreaking, I think. 200,000 older people have not, obviously at the time that they were asking the question, had a conversation with family or friends for a month. And so the children and the school put this together with what they knew about the importance of connection for emotional health and well-being, and the children decided on some action. And this is what they did. So I'm quoting here from the Sussex Express. Year 5 pupils from the appropriately named, that's me, SEAL Primary Academy took a group of residents from the area to visit the Novium Museum in Chichester. The children teamed up with various lunch clubs around Chelsea and spent several months planning an interactive tour of the museum. During the trip, people aged from 9 to 91 sat down together for lunch in the museum cafe to allow time to chat and to get to know each other. Then they explored the museum together, with pupils sharing interesting facts they had learned about their favourite exhibits and passing around artefacts for everybody to look at. Loneliness can be considered at the individual level, the school level, the community level, as we've just seen. But work in this area is also really helpfully undertaken, I think, to promote empathy and understanding at a societal level. So one of the ways that we can do that is to explore the experience of refugees. This might be through stories and videos for younger children. This is a fantastic book being read aloud on YouTube. The link is there. And for older children, there's a whole range of resources, on the website and in a resource sheet. And it tackles not just the understanding, but also the myths and stereotypes that circulate about refugees and impact both on the refugees themselves and the asylum seekers and other associated groups, but also on how we view different groups of people within society. Some very useful conversations that can happen from that starting point. So in this slide, there is a link to a PowerPoint for, a link to a website where there are 7 videos. I think it's called something like 7 videos guaranteed to change the way you see refugees. They're really, really powerful. So watch them, use them carefully, but, potentially incredibly helpful for working with older students. And continuing with the topic of refugees, another great activity here. This is a video of an incredibly clever poem by Brian Bilston. So watch that now if you can and think about how you might use that with older learners. So yeah, pause the presentation while you watch the video. It's well worth a few minutes of your time. So we're going to finish this section in a second, but just before the activity to finish the session, or this part at least of the session, we're going to watch another really moving video. Now, this is opera singer Karim Sullivan, and he held up this sign. You can read it more clearly in the video. While standing on a busy street in New York, he was blindfolded, and it was shortly after the 2016 election in America. So when you're watching the video, have a look at what he's standing in front of. He was explaining how it felt to be looked on as an outsider in America. He was asking passers-by, I suppose it should be, to shake his hand or give him a hug to help him feel that he was safe. This always brings a tear to my eye, a little shiver down the spine. I find it a really, really powerful reminder, a helpful reminder that sessions that promote emotional health and well-being and teach social and emotional learning need to move us as well as educators. It's the affective is as important as the cognitive in this whole area of health and well-being. So watch it if you can now, and just bear in mind the song, which I think is really beautiful, accompanies the video, is actually being sung by Karim Sullivan himself. Enjoy. Here you might like to pause the presentation now to consider undertaking the tasks suggested on the slide here. It's really important that we engage in these activities ourselves as adults, as well as expecting young people, the young people that we work with, to do so. It's a reminder, again, that health and well-being and social and emotional learning is for everyone, not just the students.